Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Richard Allen, does that sound really echoey? Richard Allen has been convicted of murdering 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German. But right now, the case is far from over. And on top of that, many people are not convinced Richard Allen is the real killer. So tonight, I want to do a deep dive into the timeline developed from both sides during the trial. Here's why I think it's so critically important to do this at the end of the trial when all of the evidence is in, even though there's been an actual verdict by the jury. First of all, the case, as I said, is far from over. In this particular case, there will 100% be an appeal. We will be waiting to find out when that gets filed, how it gets filed, what exactly the issues are. But there's no question at all that there will be an appeal of this particular case. Secondly, we want to do some sort of critical thinking about what we learned and what we didn't learn, because it may challenge what we believe or what we think we want to believe. And we want to ask the question, how do the pieces fit together? Now that we actually have all of the evidence that's been presented, how do all of those pieces fit and join together? And what do they tell us about whether or not Richard Allen is the murderer of Libby and Abby? Now, and before we critique the jury, the judge, the prosecution, that's obviously something we want to do, is make sure that we're correct. What are the actual facts? And the third reason is that I think that the timeline will give us insights into what happened at the trial, as opposed to what everybody thought they knew beforehand, because there were, of course, many rumors. There were many things that were part and parcel of what people believed happened, and there was evidence that did not come into the trial. Will that come in on a second trial? We'll wait to find out to see whether or not this case gets reversed by the appellate court. But as for right now, the question of what exactly did the jury have before it when the jury made the decision? So that's what I want to look at. This timeline is focused on what came out at trial. So since the judge did not allow Richard Allen to present evidence of third-party culprits, I didn't include those, except to the extent he was allowed to get in a few sort of tangential points during the trial. I did put those in. I have an entirely separate timeline on Richard Allen's confessions. Now, if there's interest, go ahead and please put that in the chat or in the comments, and I'll think about doing that as a separate piece. For tonight, I'm just going to do the timeline for Richard Allen. So there have been some questions about, okay, what are you going to be doing next, Lee? What case will you be covering? And I wanted to give you just a super quick 2-minute explanation of what that is. There's a case going on right now. It's being broadcast by Court TV on a woman named Chloe Driver. It's a really important case because it has a lot of issues that are relevant just to us as a society about mental illness, about the insanity plea. Chloe Driver killed her 13-month-old daughter, Hannah, and nobody disputes that she killed her daughter, Hannah. The question is whether or not she will be found to be not guilty by reason of insanity. And what do we think about that? What are the rules around that? So I think it's a really important case because it gives us a chance to talk about and think about that. So I'm going to give you just a quick 2-minute overview, and you will know what's coming next, and then we're going to dive into the timeline.
Here, that Chloe Driver was one of 3 wives of a man named Ryan. What you will hear is that they had very sort of radical views. They were strict vegans. They only drank purified water. They did not believe in any type of drugs or alcohol. Hannah never had a birth certificate or went to the doctor. You'll hear that they participated in alternative healing practices like drinking their own urine, sensory deprivation, meditation, that they did not believe in modern medicine. When Jason and Benjamin were distracted, moving things out of the basement, Chloe Driver, at some point, went down to the kitchen, got a knife out of the knife block, returned to the room with Hannah, locked the door behind her, and repeatedly stabbed Hannah to death with this knife. She then took the knife and stabbed herself in the neck. The defense is raising the issue of insanity and going to ask you to find her not guilty by reason of insanity. And that is their burden to prove. She searched killing somebody to save them. Also, a couple of weeks before she killed Hannah, she searched how to snap a neck. The evidence is going to be she was evaluated in the hospital by a psychiatrist shortly after she killed Hannah, and he indicated the patient felt the only way out was to kill her daughter and herself. There is going to be evidence in this case that she believed some things that were pretty crazy. That the world is fake, that we're living in hell, that they have the ability to, with their minds, control the actions of other people around them. These things were not unique to Chloe Driver. The entire group believed that this higher level of consciousness was something that they were called upon to do, to serve the world. But here's the thing that is very, very clear and will be very important to your determination in this case. None of these bizarre views had anything to do with Hannah. She had the means to leave. The evidence is going to be she didn't want to. She wanted him. The evidence will not demonstrate that she meets the definition of criminal insanity to the extent that she cannot be held responsible for her actions.
Miss Driver did search for other things other than how to snap a neck. She did searches that were trying to, how to find a bus ticket for a 13-month-old. How do I travel with a child I don't have a birth certificate to? She searched for schizophrenia. She searched for other ways to get mental help, things that she was being denied. There is no other reason for her to have killed Hannah but for her psychotic symptoms and delusions that she was under on December 8th of 2020.
You're going to hear.
So let me go ahead and pull that out. So I just think it's an interesting case because it really deals with some issues. We saw some of these issues in the Lori Vallow Daybell case as we talked about whether or not she wasn't allowed even the option of any kind of plea related to insanity because that wasn't an option in Idaho. But Chloe Driver is being tried in Georgia where, like most states, there are options around insanity and mental illness. Although they have different rules in different states, there are actually options here. So that's, so I just, I thought it'd be really worth talking about and looking at that a little bit. And so I will be doing that tomorrow night. We will be covering, we'll be starting on that case, looking at what's happened in the first week of that case. So let's dive into the timeline of the Richard Allen Delphi murders case. I want to say a special shout out to the first 5 in the chat tonight: Rita Young, Asha Harry, Forensic Fuhrer, Maureen Brophy, and Barb Russell. So let's go ahead and pull up our timeline. So this is a timeline that has evolved over the course of the trial. And I started with a timeline that I made beforehand, but then I really wanted to focus in on what happened at trial, what came out at trial. So that's where it sort of morphed. And I pulled out anything I had related to third parties. If there was anything on Brad Holder or anything that wasn't actually presented to the jury, I tried very hard to pull that out. So let me kind of show you what I have here. And I'm going to have several different colors, as you can see, 6 different colors. And that way we can kind of talk through what relates to what. So yellow is anything that came in that was related to potential suspects, third parties who might be considered part of what happened, who might have been considered liable or guilty. The navy is related to Bridge Guy. And I'm separating Bridge Guy from Richard Allen for a reason, because some evidence came in that it wasn't that Richard Allen was Bridge Guy. It was just, here's what we found about Bridge Guy. That's, of course, the description of the person videotaped by Libby in that surreptitious videotape that she did just as Abby and she were being abducted. Then bright green is witnesses who were on the trail that day. And so if there was something that was related to, and well, let me go ahead and finish. Teal is anything related to Richard Allen, actually related to Allen himself. Pink is anything related to Libby and Abby. And if a trail witness was talking about Libby and Abby, I went ahead and made that pink because I thought it was so important to be able to follow the girls to the extent we could figure out when and where there was something related to them. And then red, I put for some just super critical times or dates that I really wanted us to notice. So let's pull into what we got. And we're just going to go through the entire thing. So we have an overview of what happened. All right. So we start out, and the timeline as I began it starts on the morning of the 13th. Now, Libby and Abby are still at home. They've spent the night at Libby's house. They are hanging out or maybe even asleep. This is the morning before they're abducted. Their bodies will be found the next day on the 14th of February, 2017. So witness Teresa Liebert saw a strange, curious man standing by the mailboxes on 625 West, the road leading to the Monon High Bridge. She commented to her husband, "Who's that?" So there was also a sketch related to the person she saw by the mailboxes, but that sketch was not admitted into evidence. The judge kept that out. Then at 8:45 a.m., Brad Heath sees an older blue faded vehicle parked 2 feet off the road on the Heartland east side, halfway between the CPS building and where the road starts to curve. So this is all on the north side of the trails. And he's seen somewhere parked near there an older blue faded vehicle. You know, that older blue faded vehicle does not look a lot like what Richard Allen was driving. So I put it in the category of potentially related to a possible third-party suspect. In this particular case, initially, I think that the prosecution had hinted that this vehicle that was seen was related to Richard Allen because it was pulled in backwards as if to hide the license plate. It was sketchy in a lot of ways. But in this, it really seemed to devolve into something that had nothing to do with Richard Allen over the course of the trial. So then at 12:25 p.m., Brianna Wilbur posts a photo at Freedom Bridge as she arrives with Riley Voorhees, Isabel Voorhees, and Anna Spaeth. The 4 girls walked along the trails and are primarily important for a couple of reasons. First, Brianna's photographs really pinned the time down on when they were there, and they saw somebody they identified as Bridge Guy. They did not identify him as Richard Allen, but that is what the prosecution believes. The person that they saw, and you're going to see it as we go through here, was Richard Allen. So then at 12:43 p.m., Brianna Wilbur takes a picture of Monon High Bridge. Now, the reason it's so important, these photographs, is that they're time-stamped within the phone. Witnesses are just notoriously poor at being able to remember and tell what exactly happened and at exactly what time. That's just not something people normally think about. They just go walking and they might think about when they need to be back, but they aren't really focused on what time is it right this second. When they pass somebody, they don't say, what time am I seeing this person? So these pinpointed photographs are very useful for law enforcement as they figure out what exactly are the time, and also for us. So at 1:20 p.m., we have the first thing that relates to Libby and to Abby. That's why it's in pink. Derek German, Libby's father, leaves home for a job, and at some point afterwards, Libby calls and asks him to pick her up. So what she's doing is arranging. Her sister is going to drop Abby and Libby off at the trails. They're going hiking. They're going to just go for a walk. It's a day off school. It's a Monday, but they were off having something to do with a snow day, and it was unseasonably warm. So they just thought it would be fun to go to the trails. So Libby is making arrangements. Her sister can drop her off, but can somebody pick her up? And her dad agrees to do that. He's also going to be the first to sound the alarm when she doesn't show up. So at 1:26 p.m., Brianna Wilbur takes a photo just east of the Freedom Bridge at a bench. So by now, the girls have arrived at the park at Freedom Bridge. They walked all the way down to the Monon High Bridge, and now they're all the way almost back to the Freedom Bridge at the other end of the trail. And pretty sure I've got a picture of that can give you. Okay, so you can see the Monon High Bridge with the arrow there. If you look, you can see in white type Freedom Bridge over there to the left, and it's got a little purple icon. So the girls arrived at Freedom Bridge, walked down to the Monon High Bridge, and then walked back to Freedom Bridge. And by the girls, I mean the witnesses. I don't mean Libby and Abby. All right, so let's switch back to this. So that's 1:26. Shortly afterwards, on their way to Freedom Bridge, the girls pass a man who is creepy, does not make eye contact, and is walking with a purpose. So that's a description that they believe relates to bridge guy. That's why I put it in blue. The prosecution would go further. The prosecution believes they're seeing Richard Allen as he arrives at the trails. Notice that it's not 1:26 p.m. that they see the person. It's shortly after 1:26. So the timestamp on the photo has clued us into when this occurred. So they now are going to see a man pass them. So something after 1:26, who knows, 2:05, some period of time afterwards, but we don't have a firm time for that. And then at 1:27 p.m., there's video at the Hoosier Harvest Store showing a vehicle matching Richard Allen's 2016 Ford Focus with wheels through which you can see light. That was the big way that the prosecution distinguished his vehicle, was the wheels were see-through, so light would come through it. And they say that the video that they showed the jury, we saw it just briefly in closing arguments, showed a vehicle with the wheels that you could see light through. Then at 1:30 p.m., according to his initial account to law enforcement, Richard Allen arrives at the trails. He says he parked at the old Farm Bureau building, believed to be the Child Protective Services building or CPS building. He says he saw a group of 3 females on the trails. So that would mean that the girls, Brianna Wilbur and the other girls, could have seen Richard Allen. Note there is a difference. Several people referred to them as 3 girls, and there were actually 4. He says he saw a group of 3 females on the trails. When he's interviewed in 2022, Richard Allen will say he was at the trail between 12 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. So I put that in there because there are 2 different times that he talked about being at the trails. One between 1:30 and 3:30, and that's what I put in here. And the other between 12 and 1:30, earlier. If he was present at the earlier time, he's gone. By the time Libby takes that bridge guy video, he's out of there. He's no longer present. On the other hand, if he is there from 1:30 to 3:30, he is just arriving at 1:30, not leaving at 1:30, but getting there initially. Now, the prosecution thinks the 1:27 p.m. shot of his car going past the Hoosier Harvest Store is a great proof that he actually was arriving at the trails, not leaving, because of the direction he was coming. He was headed west, which would be toward Delphi, which is where he lived, and he was coming from seeing his mother. So the prosecution believes that 1:30 time frame is when he's getting there, not when he's leaving. All right, from 1:31 to 2:08 p.m., Libby's phone registers 1,682 steps. Now notice how broad a time frame that is. That is not, a brief period of time. That is from before the girls probably even left to get to the trails, certainly before they were dropped off, and then all the way until they reached the Monon High Bridge. So because 2:13, they're on the far end of the Monon High Bridge. So they're walking, the steps occurred over a 37-minute period of time. It's not pinpointed any more specifically than that, but it came from Libby's phone. From 1:41 to 1:44 p.m., Libby, and what I did was I put the first time, so that's why sometimes it'll be a little bit out of order. If you go to the end time of the previous one, it's after this, but if you go to the beginning, it's before. So that's how I decided where to put them on the timeline. So from 1:41 to 1:31, somewhere in there, they start walking. From 1:41 to 1:44, Libby posts several photographs on Snapchat, and they're found in the Snapchat cache on her phone. That's really important because there's one that's not found on there, which led to one of the significant mysteries of the case. What happened to that video? But these are just pictures of the bridge or of Abby or of the 2 of them in the car. And those are things that we actually were able to see, or the jury was, and that law enforcement found on Libby's phone. right there. So at 1:46 p.m., another witness, Betsy Blair, is captured on the Hoosier Harvest Store video traveling east to park at the trailhead. So you can kind of see the way it all weaves together. All of these people are in and out and around the trails throughout this period of time. And what each one of them sees sort of weaves into the picture of the overview of what is actually happening, of who's there and what they're seeing. So this is a new witness, Betsy Blair, and she is traveling east. She's going to park at the trailhead. And she too will see things on the trail. We'll get to that in just a minute. So we get back to Libby and Abby, the pink. At 1:48 p.m., Kelsey German, Libby's sister, drops Libby and Abby off at the Mears entrance to the Monon High Bridge Trail. So let me get a better picture than that, because I've got several on here. And I just have to pick out the one. How would that do? No, that's too specific. All right, I'll remove that. I'll look for excuse me. I'll look for yet another on that. Let's see, what do we need? Close up, maybe? Did I already do the close up? Oh, I already did the close up. All right, we need another one. let me get a better one for you. I'm gonna try that. It says I already have that one too. Well, I've shown you everything. I know I haven't, though. There's a better one that shows the Mears entrance. And that's what I want to show you specifically. Well, uh-oh. I think I deleted something. Hopefully nothing that was important. All right. Well, darn it. I've got all of those slides right here, and it would help to show you that. So, well, I'm just gonna stop there. Oh, see, there we go. All right. So, the Mears entrance is where Libby and Abby went. It's also where David McCain, we're about to talk about him, entered. It's where Betsy Blair entered. A lot of people parked there. It is now chained off with a gate, so people aren't parking there. But clearly it was a very popular entrance at the time, because most of the people did. I think Betsy Blair entered there. So in this particular case, you can see where the Mears entrance is. It's right in the middle. The Freedom Bridge, I'll make myself a little smaller so you can see. See the Freedom Bridge there? There's a little arrow. That's where the 4 girls entered. But about partway down, maybe a little less than halfway down toward the Monon High Bridge, is the Mears entrance, right across from the Mears farm. Several people, including Libby and Abby, entered right there. And you can see the blue is the Deer Creek. You can see the clothing was found in the creek on the far side. The bodies were found about where you see it. And the girls walked along the Monon High Bridge, which, by the way, it doesn't stop right where you see the water. It isn't a bridge just over the water. It's a bridge that goes out into the woods past that. So the girls, everybody started on the north side. The girls ended up on the south side, across the creek, and back on the north side. That's where they were found the next day. All right, so... Oh, now I know what I've got to share my screen with you again. That's what the issue was. All right. I knew something seemed to be missing. All right. So 1:48, Kelsey German drops Libby and Abby off at that Mears entrance I showed you. Then at 1:49, video from the Hoosier Harvest Store captures a white car matching Kelsey German's vehicle westbound. That means leaving on the road running past the Mears entrance to the trail. So in other words, we have evidence about the timing of Kelsey German, because we've got the Hoosier Harvest Store video. It's got a timestamp on it. So there's some proof that shows right about when Libby and Abby were dropped off, just a minute or so before the video captures Kelsey's car. Then from 2 to 3 p.m., David McCain arrives at the trails between 2 and 3 p.m. and parks at the Mears entrance. So David McCain, yet another person who is going to be on the trails, who will see a few things, and all of these things get woven in together, and it shows where exactly, and all that will create the big story. We're trying to figure out What does that tell us about what Richard Allen had to do with the murders of Libby and Abby? So he arrives, pretty broad time frame, between 2 and 3 p.m. That's a really broad. He was either there when things were happening or not there down at the Monon High Bridge. So we'll keep going on that. Let me say a few thank yous too. Oh, thank you, Carrie and Luke. They have been with us every night, I think. Carrie and Luke have. So thank you, Lucy. I appreciate that so much. And let me keep going on our timeline, and I'll thank some more people in just a minute. So back to Libby and Abby, because this includes one thing about Libby and Abby. So at 2 p.m. roughly, Betsy Blair goes under the railroad bridge and sees the 3 girls, really 4 girls, walking on the bridge. At about 2 p.m., she's at the Monon High Bridge, and she sees a man standing about 50 feet away on the bridge. As I understood that, what they're saying is, first she went under the railroad bridge on the north side, then she walked back on the top area to the actual bridge itself, not underneath it anymore. And that's when she sees a man standing about 50 feet away on the bridge. She describes him in a way that has really different from Richard Allen. She describes him as young, beautiful, curly hair, longish, and Richard Allen has very little hair. He's older, he's a little heavy, and he's very short. So it seems like a really poor match for Richard Allen, the way she describes it. But she turns around and heads back to the Mears entrance. On the way, she passes 2 girls, likely Libby and Abby. So those 2 girls are now on their way to the bridge. The important part about this is the description of the person notwithstanding, that the prosecution believes Richard Allen is on the bridge and Libby and Abby are headed there. And they are going to cross over the bridge to the far south side of the bridge. And we know that because of Libby's video, which we're going to get to in just a minute. So at 2:02 p.m., Brad Weber clocks out of work at 5500 State Road 38 East. Why does that matter? Brad Weber is a potential suspect. He's also the driver of the van. During his confessions, Richard Allen named one piece of information that the prosecution says he could not have known unless he was the killer. Initially, we were told in opening and prior to the case that there were numerous things that Richard Allen said in his confessions, or at least the implication was there were a number of things he said that only the killer could know. It turned out it was one piece of information. What he said was he was going to SV the 2 girls. He was going to R them. He elected not to do that because suddenly a van came along the drive underneath the bridge, startled him. He changed his mind and he decided he was going to have to kill the girls instead. The only thing we know about that is from Richard Allen himself. There was no evidence of that having been important to the killer other than Richard Allen stating that in one confession that he made. It was the fullest confession. It was one he made to the prison psychologist, Dr. Monica Walla. And so that particular confession mentioned the van. Brad Weber drove a van, a white van. And that particular van, he would have driven on his driveway, which was that dirt road that crossed underneath the Monon Bridge. And it went underneath to his house. Nobody else would be driving back there, just Brad Weber. So Brad Weber clocks out of work at 2:02. There's proof of that, evidence that he did. And then the question is whether or not he came straight home and drove the van and could have startled Richard Allen, or whether or not he in fact went to check his ATM machines. He owned ATM machines. He told the FBI in one interview that he had gone to check the ATM machines. Therefore, he wouldn't have been there to startle Richard Allen. So that became a huge issue within the case. So at 2:05 p.m., Libby posts a photo of the Monon High Bridge with no one pictured in the photo. And that photo, again, found in the Snapchat cache on her phone. Then at 2:06 p.m., Brad Heath notices the same older car parked by the road near the CPS building. So you see how we're flipping back and forth as we build our timeline. It's lots of different pieces that will all work together to create a single picture of what happened. So we've moved from Libby and Abby taking pictures, and right about that time, Brad Heath is noticing that same older car parked by the road near the CPS building. The reason Brad Heath was brought by the defense was to show that this older car had nothing to do with Richard Allen. Richard Allen was there for a period of time, and he didn't drive an older car like that. So Brad Heath is noticing that that car was there in the morning, and that car is still there in the afternoon. The reason that Richard Allen's team wanted that is to show, obviously not Richard Allen's car, somebody else is there, and who knows, that may be a potential suspect. I should have put that in green, actually, now that I think about it. 2:07 p.m. We're back to Libby and Abby. Libby's phone is unlocked and accesses the Snapchat at 2:07, and then it gets locked again. What's really bizarre about this particular Snapchat is that that photo is not found on her phone. Every other photo is found on her phone, but Commander Cecil found a Snapchat photo purporting to be from Libby in this time frame on the internet. In the picture, Abby is on the bridge wearing the same clothes she had on February 13th, the day the girls disappeared. Libby unlocks her phone for the last time at 2:07:20. This is one of the bizarre things that just doesn't fit. Where is that Snapchat photograph? Why isn't it on Libby's phone when every other photograph is? And how did it get on the internet? If it's not something that was on Libby's phone, how is it available on the internet? It could be that there's something related to it having been sent somehow to her iPad, and maybe someone found it there. Maybe somehow it got posted through there. I don't know an explanation, and none was given to us at trial. I consider that to be one of the really important loose ends at the trial that nobody really nailed down for us. So it seems really confusing. Does it suggest that really someone else was there with Libby and Abby who took this photograph? Or is there somebody who took Libby's phone and deleted something? Like, how did that happen? Why isn't the photograph there when all of the others are? From 2:08 to 2:25, Libby's phone then clocks movement of 414 meters. Now, I did want to say that WANE had a different time frame than I did. I had this running from 2:08 to 2:25, and they had it running from 2:08 to 2:18. That's, I think, significant. It's not crucial one way or the other, but the reason why I think it's significant is if it runs from 2:08 to 2:18 as WANE had, then that means there's a period of time where the girls are stopped between 2:18 and 2:25 where they're not moving. Could that be the period of time when the clothes are exchanged or clothes are taken off, and then when the van comes? And then they go on the move again at 2:25 until they end up in their final, the clearing where they both died, or at least Libby died. And it seems to me very likely that Abby died there. Certainly the prosecution thinks that at 2:32. So I mentioned that to say, I don't know which one is right. If anyone was at the trial and has notes, please let me know. That's what I had in my notes. So I just wanted to note that it might be a little different. So at 2:13, we're back to Bridge Guy. When they are just a few yards from getting back to Freedom Bridge, Riley Voorhees says her group of girls saw a man. Now, she tells law enforcement that that man is dressed in all black hoodie, pants, mask. Then she said, well, maybe he just seemed dark because of his really unhappy behavior. Now, why is this one so important? It's because it doesn't really fit with the rest, right? The time doesn't fit. Bree Wilbur also said that they saw a man, also says they saw a man on their way back, not far from Freedom Bridge, but she had a different time. You see, we can come back up here. She took her photograph at 1:26, and that was just east of the Freedom Bridge at a bench. They're continuing to walk, and it's after 1:26 that the girls would have seen this man, according to Bree Wilbur. Now, also with her was Riley Voorhees. Now, Riley Voorhees agrees that they saw the man, but she put it much later. That's why that phone and the data that comes from it is so critical, because the photograph is timestamped. So the prosecution says that or I think would believe that Riley Voorhees just has the time wrong. She can't possibly be seeing Bridge Guy at 2:13. That's exactly when Libby's taking the video of Bridge Guy abducting them. Therefore, the prosecution would say this can't possibly be Bridge Guy. And so they probably, I would say, believe that Riley Voorhees has the time wrong, that the correct time would be something after 1:26. That would make it possible to be Richard Allen. However, if Riley Voorhees's time is right, you see where this offers an opportunity for the defense, because maybe it really is Richard Allen. And if so, and the person really is seen at 2:13 p.m., then that can't be the person who abducted Libby and Abby. So you can see where not everything fits together perfectly. Not all the witnesses kind of make sense. Let me make this a little bigger. Okay. So back at 2:13 p.m., critical, probably the most important piece of evidence besides the confessions is that 2:13 p.m., Libby captures a 43-second video showing Abby walking at the very end of the Monon High Bridge, moving toward Libby, and there's a a person behind her and walking. He's wearing a dark jacket, blue jacket, and he's wearing jeans, and it's very confusing. The whole video is very confusing. There's the first video, and it's just jerky and moving around. There's a lot of pictures of the ground and of the leaves, and it looks like Libby's trying to surreptitiously film the person, and she lifts it up so that it can be seen. But it looks pretty much like something that is done with not intentionally she would love to video the whole thing, but she's trying to keep it a secret. That's how I interpreted it. And I think a lot of people who watched the video did that. In this particular case, law enforcement enhanced the video and they showed a different video. It was also disorienting because there's a video, you see the guy walking, which didn't really appear in the first, but then it looks down and looks back up, and there's the man right behind Abby, like right there. And like, whoa, how did he move that fast? That's the first thought I had. How did that happen? But this video is super important. And a man says, guys down the hill on that video. There was the jury requested 2 pieces of evidence that they wanted to look at again. And they had lots of paper evidence with them, but they wanted to look at a couple of things again. This was one of the pieces of evidence. They also wanted the first or second interview with Richard Allen. And some people speculated maybe they wanted to compare the voice. Maybe they wanted to look at the voice and listen to the voice of Richard Allen as he was moving, as he was being interviewed in a rather calm situation, relatively speaking. And when he said, guys down the hill, did the voices sound alike? And that may be what it was. Who knows why exactly they were doing that? Again, if you're a juror listening, I would love to interview you. I would love to talk to you about what it is that was most important for you. What were the pieces of evidence that were really persuasive to you? And that would be, I think, so informative for our listeners. So please contact me. You can reach me if you go to my YouTube page. It's got an email that you can write there. So please do. I would love to talk to you. So law enforcement did an entire transcript of what they believed was being said on this particular video. I will say this, I could not hear even close to all of the things that they said that they heard. That probably could be fixed if you were able to listen to the video over and over again. You could probably reach conclusions about the things that were said because you could hear talking, but it was just in the setting of a big courtroom like that, it was impossible to get actual phrases out of it other than a couple. And I did feel like there was one period of time when Libby, I think it was, said, well, how are we going to get to something like, how are we going to get down the hill? There's no path, something along the line. All right, so next we are going to go to back to one of the witnesses. Betsy Blair is seen on the Hoosier Harvest Store video leaving westbound. As she leaves, she sees an old-timey car that may be a Comet parked at the old Child Protection Services building. So again, this can't be Richard Allen because that vehicle is there the whole time. That was one of the reasons that the defense wanted to put this information in. Ironically, the prosecution hadn't really argued it, but the defense went ahead and argued the counter that this was not Richard Allen's vehicle. So Betsy Blair is now leaving. Again, we've got a timestamp on it. So we know that Betsy Blair has seen a man on the bridge. We know that she's seen Libby and Abby walking toward the bridge, and this is all pinpointed as being before 2:14. That's when she's leaving. Then at 2:14 p.m., Libby's video stops, and someone tries to biometrically unlock the phone and is not successful. That could very well be Libby, who realizes her phone is off and would like to unlock it, but isn't able to do that without being spotted. So she, I don't know, pockets it or something, and then, but is not able to unlock it right then. At 2:15, we're back to the witnesses. Riley Voorhees' estimate of when she, her sisters, and Bree Wilbur reached the mouth of the trail and they head home. Remember, she had things being much later. She was the one who believed that bridge guy was seen about 2:13. So that truly isn't really possible because it's a lot longer than 2 minutes to get from, well, I guess we don't know exactly where they were. I guess that's possible. They were just a few yards from getting back to Freedom Bridge when they saw a man. And then at 2:15, they reached the mouth of the trail and they head home at 2:20. Riley dropped off Bree Wilbur at her home. I think they said she had a hard stop. She had to be home at 2:20. So that's why they were pretty sure about that time. We've got Libby's phone moving again from 2:25 to 2:31 p.m. 68 steps or 50 meters. Now, WANE had 66 steps and it went till 2:32. I don't think that difference matters as much as the other one. I would really like to know which of us was correct on the other, just for the information of wanting to figure out exactly how this worked. But Libby's phone moved 68 steps, not a lot, not a lot. Now, I did want to say, I had a friend who was at the trial. One of the things that I've said is, this is such a tight. I'll go to 2:32 p.m. and then say that. We'll keep working through here. So from 2:27 to 2:30 is when law enforcement estimates that Brad Weber would have arrived home. His van would have moved under the Monon High Bridge at approximately this time, if he's right that he did not service his ATM machines first, and if he's right that he came straight home. So the way it worked was, initially Brad Weber was stopped at a stop outside his home as he was about to get onto his driveway and drive home. And he told law enforcement, said, where were you yesterday? And he said, well, that he came straight home after work. Then he was interviewed by the FBI and another, I believe, Indiana State Police. And he told them that he actually had gone to service the ATM machines first and then came home. And now at trial and in the pretrial interview that the prosecution did, he told them that he came straight home. It's all important in terms of whether or not it's even possible for him to have interrupted Richard Allen in the middle of what he says he was trying to do to the girls, the SV. That was what Richard Allen claims he was trying to do. Is it possible? Well, there's no van that could go through there except Brad Weber's. And if Brad Weber was off servicing his ATM machines, then Brad Weber didn't drive through there with a van. On the other hand, if he in fact came straight home, sure enough, he may be there. Now, is this a situation where Brad Weber was trying to cover the fact that he was at home when the girls were perhaps abducted? Who knows? We have no real way of knowing this. What we do know is that he testified to the jury that he came straight home. All right, so from 2:31 to 2:32, Libby's phone registers a 2-floor elevation change. And then at 2:32 is the last movement of Libby's phone. So let me pull this out for just a minute and talk to you about sort of why that is so critically important. One of the bizarre things about the data from Libby's phone is that it doesn't show the downhill part. law enforcement believes that Libby and Abby were forced down the hill to where the road was, then down all the way to the creek. Somewhere in that range is when they were, at least Libby had to take clothes off, and some of those clothes were put on Abby, and they weren't wearing the right clothes. So all of that seemed odd, but something happened. And then they were forced across the creek and then up the hill on the other side. That particular scenario where they get forced up the hill, that is an elevation change. So is coming from the bridge down to the road, down to the creek. We know that the bridge itself is 65 feet above the creek. We also know the bridge is fairly flat. It was a train trestle, so it can't have a huge decline. So I'm guessing 60 feet or so from the bridge when they get off it all the way down to the creek. Now, they aren't going straight down, but that's the elevation change. Then on the other side, however much it would be, and I don't know the answer as to how much it would be to go back up to the area where they were found, but that seems more like 6 floors going down that would have been recorded. We were told every 10 feet would record of elevation change would record as one set of stairs, one set of steps, not just steps. I need to be stairs. It would actually be stairs. It would be 6 floors if it was 60 feet. So there would be a 6-floor elevation change. And then on the other side is another 1 or 2. This 231 to 232 time with the 2-floor elevation change, that would match. That would match. They're across the creek and they're moved up. I don't know that it's 20 feet, but it could be. I know it's higher than the creek, but they never gave us a measurement for that. And why not? I would like to know the answer to that. It seems like the kind of question that both sides would want to answer for us. But what's missing is the 6-floor elevation change coming down from the bridge. That's just missing. Everything else seems like it would possibly fit. I had a friend who went and did sort of a measurement of this, and she is letting me say the numbers. It was 627 steps that she took from the Mears entrance over to the Monon High Bridge Trail. Remember that Libby took way more than that. It was 1,600, I think it was. Let's see, 1,682 steps. Oops, let me go ahead and add that back. Okay, so 1,682 steps for Libby. And then there is no recording that would show us, and that took her, I can't tell how long that took. I think she said the total amount of elapsed time, it wasn't very much. One of the things I've been asking about over and over, and why neither side really explained this to us, either the defense could have really taken advantage of this, or the prosecution could have explained it and nobody did anything with it. This incredibly short time frame between when they're abducted at 2:13, because we have the video of that, and when Libby's phone stops moving, 2:32. That's 19 minutes. And during that period of time, 19 minutes, they have to be abducted. They have to move down the hill 60 feet to the creek. They have to exchange clothes, take clothes off, put clothes on. They have to get across the creek, and they have to get back up the other side. It seemed to me like the defense could have said, how are you going to do that in 19 minutes? That seems crazy. And then on the other hand, the prosecution could have said, well, here is law enforcement, and we walked this, and this is how long it took, and this is how many feet. And there could have been an answer to this one way or the other, or there could have been a great argument for the defense, but we didn't really hear a lot about that. Instead, it was pretty much just left to us to wonder, how long would that take? How many steps would it take? So she found 534 steps to the place where the creek, from the place where they were abducted down to the creek, she found 534 steps. So that again would be possible if it ran to 225. If my time of 208 to 225 is true, then that would probably be possible. And then there was some kind of deal with the clothes down by the creek. Then they're going to, And then they go on the move again at 2:25 to 2:31. They move 68 steps across the creek, and then they've got to go up. On the other hand, I think the defense could have made some real important points with this if it doesn't fit. If they could show that this is too fast, that nobody could move that fast, and especially with two girls, a single small man, even with a gun, and two girls, how's he going to get them across the creek? How's he going to get them up the other side? But we can see the time frame, and we can see how it's so important and why it's so important now. All right, let's keep going. And how do we know? Now, why is the last movement of Libby's phone so important? And I went ahead and put that in red. It's because Abby's body is found on top of Libby's phone. Libby's phone, then a shoe, Libby's shoe, and then Abby's body. And law enforcement says they believe she was killed right there and that she never moved again, that she was killed. There aren't restraints on her. It's just a bizarre situation. It's very difficult to explain. But that's the time at which there's no more movement. Libby's phone has stopped, and it stopped permanently until the bodies are found the next day. They lift up the bodies, and that's when they find the phone. In this particular case, that last movement marks the exact spot where the bodies are found. That is therefore according to the prosecution, for the prosecution theory to hold water, there has to be the 19 minutes has to accomplish everything. The entire crime took 19 minutes. Abduction to the murder of Abby. Well, I guess let me back that up a little bit. It doesn't have to be the murder of Abby. It has to be the time when the phone lands on the ground there. And then Abby is killed on top of the phone, but I guess she could have been killed a little bit later. But it's a really quick time frame for them to get to that particular spot in the woods where we saw the body found. So now we move into some more of the witnesses moving around. 2:50 p.m., Cheyenne Mill arrives at the trails, parks at the Mears entrance. That's yet another witness put on by the defense. At 3:11 p.m., Derek German, that is Libby's father, runs into Dave McCain coming from the High Bridge, and Dave says he hasn't seen the girls. So Derek German is looking for them. They didn't show up. He was supposed to pick them up. They aren't there. He starts to look around for them, sees Dave McCain. Hey, you seen a couple of girls? No, he hasn't seen them. So by now, we know that the girls are missing and that people out on the bridge in this time frame are not seeing Libby and Abby. So you see how incredibly tight this time frame is. 3:12, Cheyenne Mill gets a phone call while she's on the trail. Cheyenne Mill and Shelby Duncan walk across the bridge, encountering their friend Shelby Dix and her boyfriend Daniel at the first platform of the bridge. It's an old train trestle, and there are little platforms of wood that stick out on either side of the bridge and that people can sit on. So that's where Shelby Dix and her boyfriend Daniel are sitting. And Cheyenne and her friend Shelby Duncan encounter no one else on the trails except an old man with something she assumed was a camera around his neck. Now, David McCain, older, he's in his 70s, and he said he did have his camera with him that day. He might have had it around his neck. Cheyenne and Shelby Duncan continue to the south end of the bridge and get off on the side to use the bathroom. So you see that it's just 45 minutes, a little bit longer, since it's just 45 minutes since they were abducted, Libby and Abby. And I guess maybe make that more an hour because it was at 2:13 that the abduction was filmed. The phone is now across the way underneath where Libby's body was found. Let me just go ahead and finish. This is prosecution theory, and it's all the way over there, lying in the clearing, 232. And now here, Cheyenne Mill and Shelby Duncan walk across the bridge. They're all the way to the exact spot where Libby and Abby were abducted. They go off the side of the bridge to use the bathroom. They are right in the area where they were abducted, that exact area, and they see nothing. They don't see anybody around. They don't see bodies. Those would be a ways away. They wouldn't have been able to see them up there. They don't see any lurker looking for more people. They don't see any of that. It's they go all the way across the bridge. So now the defense theory would be that during this time frame, the girls, and it's not fully explained, but that the girls would have been abducted, probably driven somewhere, that they were forced down the hill to a waiting car. Something happened with the phone that somehow prevented motion or prevented detection of motion. It wouldn't have detected motion while in the car, but that the girls were taken somewhere else and that their bodies were returned to that place in the woods, placed there, and they were murdered sometime during the night between 2 a.m. when the search for them was called off and 7 a.m. when the search began again. Right in that time frame, they believe the bodies were put down there. Now, there are also problems with that. For example, that there's no movement of the phone down the hill from the cemetery, for example, or anything like proof that the steps fit with the defense theory either. But that is more of what the defense would say. They weren't required to show exactly what they thought happened. And so we don't have a really detailed explanation of what they think, but there were hints that they believe the girls were abducted in a car down there on the road that runs directly under the Monon High Bridge, that someone was waiting there for them and took them elsewhere. So, but right now we've got Cheyenne and Shelby, and they're all the way across the bridge and nothing is going on there. So whatever happened to the girls, they're not there anymore. Now, at 3:30 p.m. in his first interview in 2017, Richard Allen told law enforcement that he left the trails at 3:30 p.m. The defense argues that he may mean he was there in the range of 1:30 to 3:30, not that he meant he left at 3:30. But in any event, that's what he told law enforcement. Then at 3:30 p.m. is also when Derek German calls Becky Patty to tell her Libby and Abby have not shown up to be picked up, and that Libby is not answering her phone. So Becky Patty also begins calling, texting Libby, and there's no answer. 3:49 p.m. Cheyenne Mill posts a Snapchat on the bridge on the way back. So she's already been to the other side of the bridge. She's now on the way back. 3:53 p.m. Shelby Duncan posts a photo. She's the one with Cheyenne Mill. Posts to Snapchat. Then at 3:55, there's another photo of Shelby's feet with her feet dangling over the platform. Then at 3:57 p.m., we get another witness. I put this in blue because it's again believed to be Bridge Guy. Sarah Carbaugh is captured on the Hoosier Harvest Store video traveling east. She sees a man walking west on the north side away from the Monon High Bridge. He's wearing a blue jacket and blue jeans, and he's muddy. That's what she says in the first two interviews, which were in June 7th and 19th of 2017. But then when she was interviewed in 2019, a couple of years later, she said he was bloody, like he had just slaughtered a pig. Then currently at trial, she said he was muddy and bloody, both muddy and bloody. This person they believe to be Bridge Guy. Obviously, the prosecution still believes this is Richard Allen, that he's come out of the woods from having murdered the girls. He's walking down the road to his car parked at the old Child Protective Services building, and he's muddy and bloody from having first crossed the creek and then murdered the girls. At 4 p.m., Sarah Carbaugh testifies that around this time, she notices a stressed out group gathered at the Mears entrance. One girl was bright blonde and wearing hot pink. That would presumably be the family of Libby. And then, of course, Abby's mother also joined the search at some point. And they're looking for Libby and Abby. Why aren't they showing up? Why haven't they come to the pickup point? At 4 p.m., family members arrive, begin helping Derek search the trails for Libby and Abby, and they go directly to the bridge. So that makes total sense with what Sarah Carbaugh has said. So we do know families starting to look. At 4 p.m., David McCain arrives back at the Mears entrance and is surprised at the number of vehicles and people. A large man in an orange jacket, and that would presumably be Derek German, asks him, "Have you seen two girls?" McCain had seen a man and a woman, but he had not seen two girls. So he saw a couple, and that would be believed to the friends Shelby Dix and Nathan, I think was his name, the couple on that were sitting on the bridge when Cheyenne Mill and Shelby Duncan walked by. Sometime after 4 p.m., Cheyenne Mill arrives back at the Mears entrance and sees a lady on a moped and a man. They're together and frantic. Again, this is a family searching. At 4:06 p.m., and we get into more mysteries of the phone, Libby's phone does not receive any SMS messages between 4:06 p.m. on the 13th and 4:33 a.m. on the 14th. So a good long, more than 12-hour period of time. The phone does receive phone calls and text messages through the night. So it's not as if it's out of service. It's within the range where it could receive service. After 5 p.m., families call law enforcement, which joins in the search, and that continues through the night for quite some time. 5:44 p.m., and Libby's phone last connects to the cell tower until the next morning. So 5:45 p.m. Then at 5:45 p.m., audio output begins on Libby's phone. This was the biggest surprise dropped into the case. Big surprise, really unexpected. No one knew that the defense had this. The defense, of course, believes that the reason that audio output begins on Libby's phone is because someone plugged something in to the audio jack on Libby's phone. And that it has to be somebody holding the phone. It has to be somebody manipulating the phone. If that's the case, that means that the phone is not underneath Abby. Abby is not dead yet. Something else entirely has happened. This was a critical point. Obviously, the jury in the end did not feel that this proved that somebody was manipulating this by hand, but the defense believes strongly that at 5:45 p.m., and notice how close that is in time to when her phone last connects to the cell tower until the next morning, that audio output begins on Libby's phone. Those two seem awfully close in time. Are they connected? That's one of the things I think that wasn't answered, but that the defense will believe is the case. Let me stop for just a minute, and I have a bunch of people to thank. So, oh, thank you, MD 2020. I appreciate that. And she's thanking me for the coverage and the importance of holding two truths at once. It is important to really be able to try to see both sides. That's the only way to really make a good choice. And I thank you. I do think the families deserve absolutely kind and respectful approach. I think that's really important. Thank you. Why do so many of these female lawyers argue like they're on Jerry Springer? So over the top and dramatic. I don't know. That's kind of funny. I'm not sure which ones you're talking about, but I think that's funny. All right. Paige Werner is a new member. That's awesome. It's Spunky. Good to hear from you. Thank you for the super sticker. And Dale Jones is a new member. And Spence Marcel has gifted 10 Lawyerly memberships. Thank you so much for doing that. If you haven't turned on the ability to receive memberships, Marlon or mamapinks or Denise Pelton, our mods, will put that into the chat for you so you can know how to do that. But you can always join, except from an iPhone, by just hitting the little join button beside the name Lawyer Lee right below this video. And thank you, Spunky, for gifting 5 Lawyerly memberships. I appreciate that very much. And Scooter is a new member. So we'll get to more of those in just a minute. All right, 6:18 p.m. Detective Mitch Catherine checks the Weber property for 5 to 10 minutes and does not find the girls. He does not go in the outbuildings. Now, why is this important? And I put it in yellow is because, of course, what the defense believes is that Brad Weber is a potential suspect. Maybe he's the one who abducted the girls. Now, the timing isn't exactly right because if he checked out of work at 2:02, he can't really be home by 2:13. It appeared that his work was 22 minutes from his house. So it wouldn't be possible for him to literally punch out, and apparently there was evidence of that, and be home that fast. But maybe someone else was involved, and then he was part of it. So I think that would be the defense argument. But he didn't go in the outbuildings. Could the girls have been there? That was one of the suggestions by the defenses, a hint that maybe the girls were in these buildings. From 9:30 to 10 p.m. in that range, the fire department began searching the bridge area. Oh, Jimmy, they're on the south side. They move to the east and they see lights on the other side of the creek. And they look in the water, but they don't see anything floating. Now, the reason those facts are so important is that if they see lights on the far side of the creek, that means that's right about where the body should have been. That's really important to the defense case, because if there are lights over there and they're not finding the bodies, maybe that's because the bodies aren't there yet. Just as the defense says, maybe the bodies arrived later. So it was hard fought over whether the lights were right where the bodies were or just near where the bodies were, but never made it as far as the bodies. So that was one of the issues throughout the case. And they didn't see anything in the water. We know that the next day, law enforcement found the clothes, some of the clothes of Libby and Abby there in the creek. Those clothes were below where their bodies were found, and a little bit, I believe, downstream from where the bodies were found. So what does that mean in terms of where exactly they were forced to remove their clothes? Like, how did all of that fit with where the bodies were found? If there were no clothes in the water at night when the fire department was looking, again, maybe the defense theory is right that they weren't killed until later. But they suggested, well, they didn't really look. They did look in the water, but it was dark and maybe they wouldn't have seen it. 10:22 p.m. is the last recorded data on Libby's phone. So law enforcement initially thinks that means the battery is out, it's depleted, but that turns out to not be true because we know that more things happen on Libby's phone. Now at 10:32 p.m., the audio output ends on Libby's phone. The defense says that means somebody plugged in something into the audio device at 5:45 and they unplugged something at 10:32. 5-hour period, and they say somebody is right there. One of the jurors actually asked the question, could this be a device that was plugged in to keep the phone from recording its location data? Could it have been something that was a device that would be more or less a cloaking device that would prevent the phone from recording certain information? And she said she told the juror she'd actually considered that and looked for that, and she didn't find anything like that. So it may not exist. That may not be something that I looked for it too on Amazon. I didn't see anything like that. But that is right there. The whole issue around Libby's phone had very important points for the defense in this, things that just weren't explained. Now, during a break, the prosecution witness Googled, and said, oh, well, maybe it could be because dirt or water got in the headphone jack. Maybe that's why it appeared like somebody had plugged something in and then someone unplugged something. That I feel that absolutely should not have been admitted into evidence. There was no preparation for that. It wasn't any kind of expert opinion. It was just somebody Googling something. Is that true though? I don't know. I don't know. They found that on Google. So you tell me, is it true or not? The next morning at 2 a.m., the search is discontinued just for the night. It's now 2 a.m. It's dark. They've looked where they could think of to look, and they decide we're going to start again when it's light. So at 4:33 a.m., Libby's phone connects to the cell tower and receives 15 SMS messages. And Commander Christopher Cecil says, well, the phone has to be on to receive these text messages. So another huge point for the defense. Why is the phone suddenly receiving text messages when it hasn't received them all night? The answer, the defense says, is that somebody's holding it. Somebody turns it on and it receives the text messages, and that's why it happens. Again, one of the most important arguments that the defense had in the entire case. 7 a.m., they start searching for Libby and Abby again. At 12:15 p.m., Pat Brown calls law enforcement to let them know that Abby's and Libby's bodies have been discovered in the woods on the north side of the creek. And then at 3:06 p.m., Libby's phone powers off. Commander Christopher Cecil says it likely lost power. Now, I should clarify, this is the next day. So the bodies have been removed. They found the phone. It's now in the possession of law enforcement, and it powers off the next day. So Commander Cecil says, well, by now it's finally run out of power. It had power lasting all through the night, And now the next day, it's finally out of power. Then Richard Allen, I need some water. I'm not going to make it through. We're getting close to the end, though. All right, let's see. Where were we? Thanking folks. Did I say Scooter is a new member? I think I did. Lauricia, thank you so much. And Kelly, I appreciate that. Thank you very much for that. All right, so let's head back over into, and now we've got a bunch of information about Richard Allen that we're going to throw in here. On the 16th, Richard Allen self-reports that he was on the trails on the day the girls disappeared, and law enforcement fills out a lead sheet. Now, there's a period of time, the 14th through March 21st, when dozens of interviews were taken by law enforcement, but they're all missing. And that created a huge gap. And the defense complained about that and about the problems it led to, and the obvious problems that were created in terms of the investigation, which the defense thinks was poor and poorly done. On the 18th, Captain Dan Doolin calls Richard Allen to meet about his self-report. So they're doing their due diligence. They're talking to everybody. And there is a handwritten report by Doolin about Richard Allen. Doolin suggests meeting at Allen's home or the station. I should say, he actually threw out his notes and ended up with just something he input into the computer. So he says, let's meet at your home. Let's meet at the police station. And Allen says, well, I'm on my way to the grocery store. Why don't we just meet there? And they do that within an hour of the time Doolin called. Now, the prosecution suggested, well, maybe he didn't want to meet at his home because he was hiding something. Maybe he didn't want to come to the police station because he was worried about being discovered. But frankly, it came out pretty much as he was on his way to the grocery store. They met within an hour of the time that Doolin called. So I didn't think it looked particularly suspicious. Allen said he'd initially stated he was there from 1 to 3 p.m., but had recounted it was from 1:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. That's pretty important because it seems so specific. He's actually thinking through it. He's like, okay, I said 1 to 3, but I've thought about it. And we're just 5 days after the girls were abducted. I've thought about it, 1:30 to 3:30. So that makes his 12 to 1:30 time frame, frankly, a little less believable. Not because he's trying to hide something, but just because it's so much further from the time. And he was trying hard to get the exact time for law enforcement. So probably the 1:30 to 3:30 is the one that most juries would say, okay, I'm going to go with that number because he said it nearer the time. On the 27th of February, law enforcement cycles rounds through a Glock 22, a Smith & Wesson, and a Sig Sauer and compared them to the unspent round found at the scene between the feet of Libby and Abby. The results are either inconclusive or the guns could not be excluded. One of them, of course, was Brad Weber's gun, as we understand it. And so it was either inconclusive or could not be excluded. That's why I put it in yellow. Could this be a potential other suspect? In any event, none of them were matched to the gun. Richard Allen's gun, according to law enforcement, was a match. They were able to, by firing a round, they were able to compare it to the unspent, not fired round. And they said, okay, now we believe they're the same. That's a whole different argument. I'm just throwing that out there. On the 1st of April of 2017, a new fishing license is purchased for Richard Allen and his wife, Kathy. And I put it in the passive voice because it wasn't clear who purchased it. And the defense suggested maybe Kathy purchased it, not Richard Allen. What's significant is that Richard Allen's height was changed from 5'4" to 5'6", and 15 pounds were added to his weight. Now, law enforcement put that in because they wanted to say this change suggests he's trying to hide something. He's trying to change his height and weight because he is afraid that people are going to recognize him. If he puts this into a law enforcement database to get his fishing license, maybe somebody will be searching for 5'4" men and who weigh X amount, and they'll find him. And then they'll come and get him. He'll be charged with this crime. So they say he was trying to hide this. I will say it's not like a huge change. 5'4" to 5'6" is still far on the outlier side of heights for males. And 15 pounds, I mean, Maybe he just weighed 15 pounds more. So I did find it odd that the height was changed, but it isn't like he changed it to 6'2" or something that would have been really different. He just changed it a small amount, and it doesn't seem like enough to have made a difference. So I guess I didn't count that really high on the prosecution side. Now, here is a massive gap. We are about to hit a massive gap of 5.5 years. 5.5 years. When Richard Allen's file just lies somewhere in a drawer in the middle of the station. They finished their investigation. They've looked at they haven't finished it in the sense that they've closed it, but they've looked at everybody. They've done everything. It's all organized. Kathy Shank is a volunteer, and she's organized everything in cabinets. And suddenly she finds the Richard Allen file in a drawer. It was mislabeled Richard Allen Whiteman, which apparently is the street he lives on, Whiteman. So I don't think it was any attempt to hide something. And she takes that file to Detective Tony Liggett, who is a candidate for sheriff. Now, the reason I mentioned the candidate for sheriff is that became one of the arguments, is that Tony Liggett was merely trying to make a name for himself so he could get elected sheriff. And nobody really believed Richard Allen was the culprit. They just wanted to get somebody and get somebody now so Tony Liggett could have that behind him for when he ran, and he was at the time running for sheriff. So Liggett called Steve Mullen, an investigator with the Carroll County Prosecutor's Office. And the date I use is the date when Liggett called Mullen. I'm not as sure when Kathy Shank first discovered the file. On the 13th, then, a few weeks later, about 3 weeks later, law enforcement interviews Richard Allen for the second time. Oh, that would be the first time. I should say the first time is the 13th. Then on that same day, they obtain a search warrant, and they search Richard Allen's home. They seize a Sig Sauer and a box described as a Hope box that contains a .40 caliber bullet of the same make found at the scene. And as we know, an expert witness working for the state said that bullet, that unspent cartridge at the scene, matched Richard Allen's gun that they collected at his home. Then on the 26th, law enforcement interviews Richard Allen again and arrests him. So that is the end of the timeline. Let's talk a little bit more about what came next. So that second interview on October 26th is when he was actually arrested. So they interviewed him and arrested him that same day. He kind of said, if you got anything, go ahead and arrest me. And they did. And he's been imprisoned ever since, and in solitary confinement essentially that entire time. All right, let's take a quick look over here at who I need to thank. Where was I? I was with Kelly. Oh, here we go. All right. So Jim Green asking me about the photo purporting to be from Libby found on the internet from Commander Cecil. How did that get into evidence? Where is the authentication and chain of custody? Indeed. And here's the thing. We don't see most of the exhibits. They hand stuff to the jurors. So I can't really say if that was handed to the jurors or if he just said, I found one on the internet and it was just a picture of Abby. I think that may have been. I'm not sure that they actually saw it. I know for sure we in the audience in the gallery did not see it. So, but as far as it seems, I mean, Jim, I can't argue with you. I cannot think of any way that comes into evidence other than I guess. Is there any way they could argue that I don't know. It's a very, very hard question. However, if the jury got it, then it came into evidence. So certainly they were told about it. I think the fact that I think the defense could have introduced it as saying there might have been someone else there. It wouldn't have been for the truth of anything other than to say, here's a photo and it's missing, but somebody was there. Somebody was present. We don't care about what it's shown other than Abby is pictured there on the bridge. Could it even have been altered later? Could somebody? Sure, absolutely. It could have been. There's no clear answer to that. Jim would be my answer. Anna asked, the ATM machine should have had transaction logs that show when the machine was open. They should have checked the machines. Do I know if they did? I don't think they did, Anna. One of the jurors asked the question, what about the cameras on ATM machines? Couldn't you go look at those? I think the problem is this: at the time they interviewed Brad Weber and the time that he told the FBI he first went and serviced the ATMs, I guess nobody thought to do that. Nobody was concerned. Maybe Brad Weber is the guy. Maybe we better make sure he really went to go check those ATM machines. We better look at the video. We better look at, as you point out, transaction logs that would show that cash had been placed inside the machine. None of that happened, apparently. So there isn't any record. And by now it's way, way, way too late. I mean, any video would have been overridden years and years ago. This was 2017. And by now there's no way to check that anymore. Thank you, Mama T. I appreciate that very much. Battery exhausted. I know how you feel. I'm feeling battery exhausted too. Shug E. I appreciate that. Thank you. Donna E. Thank you for the super sticker. Lindsay lights the timeline. Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate that. Oh, Shug E is a huge fangirl. Wow, I'm really honored. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, Christy, I just realized that Rick Allen walked around Delphi dressed like Bridge Guy every winter for 5 years. One of the interesting things that was pointed out at the trial was that basically everybody walked around dressed like Bridge Guy. That it was pretty much everybody wore Carhartt jackets, jeans, boots. It didn't seem like a particularly unique way of dressing. Now, law enforcement said that's how Richard Allen was dressed on the day he was there. So you've at least got that, but it wasn't completely unique. So, but yes, he would have dressed exactly like that. All right. So, Michelle Damadeo is asking me about Abby's clothes still being wet and if they took the temperature to estimate a time of death. So yeah, if only they took the temperature. And what she's pointing out is there could have been some kind of temperature taken of the girls at the scene. That could have been extremely useful in figuring out when they died, but none was taken. Law enforcement's explanation was that they didn't want to mess up potential evidence related to some kind of sexual assault on the girls. If that had happened, they wanted to be able to let the autopsy uncover that. They didn't want to do anything that would interfere with that. So they didn't do the internal temperature that they otherwise would have done. But it would have been unbelievably important. It was really a critical point. And as far as the wet clothes, one of the things she was wearing was jeans, Libby's jeans. Those stay wet for just absolutely forever. If you're trying to dry them in the dryer, it just takes forever. So I can see that. Her sweatshirt and her shirt were also wet. I don't know if the temperature, which was cool overnight, I don't know if that would have helped it maybe maintain the moisture. But I will say this, nobody gave us any evidence or information on that. If it was a point, I guess neither side really explained to us about how long it would have taken. Truth Seeker. Hi, Truth Seeker is a new member. Glad to have you. So glad you're a new member. And we are going to be doing a members only event coming up, I think this weekend. I'm going to be showing you a short video that I did up there, and we'll talk about that. All right. All right. Nicholas is asking me about, since you stated this was the reason for attending the trial, do you believe he received a fair trial? So I do believe that the fact that the third-party culprit evidence was excluded means it was not a fair trial. I do believe it should be reversed based on that. I do think it was unfair to keep all of that evidence out. It's just a wholesale ruling. I did believe that there was a nexus shown for a number of the particular third-party culprits. Now, when you actually got into the trial itself, there were many, many rulings against the defense, but I think the trial overall, an appellate court would say, that was overall fair. And they may still say that because of the confessions that they don't believe that there was enough that it would have made a difference. Just the fact that this third-party culprit evidence and the geofencing, I should add, was excluded. But I did think that was really a problem. And it was also true that the judge ruled for the prosecution and against the defense over and over and over over and over again, sometimes when it seemed too much and too often, and when it seemed that one side was being treated differently from the way that the other side was being treated. So as I think they have I guess my bottom line is I felt like that evidence was so important, it absolutely should have come in. I do think there is a much more likely chance of a reversal on appeal than normal. Usually, your chances are not high. I think it's something like 25%. I would say it's higher for Richard Allen, and it's higher for this case. And I always thought from the beginning that that's a terrible thing. There were the one thing that I present a problem for the defense is that I didn't feel like they made as strong a showing as they should have made for purposes of appeal. So when you go up on appeal, you can't just say, hey, we had some really good evidence we would have put in. You have to show the appellate court, we had some really good evidence, and here it is. This is what we would have put in. And I don't know that their proffer was as strong as I thought it should be. A proffer is where you explain the evidence that you would present if only the court let you. You would tell the jury this if only the court let you. I didn't think it was quite that strong, not as strong as it really should have been. Battery exhausted. Thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate that. Truth Seeker is thank you, Lee, for everything you were missed, and I do it all again. But we want the true justice. This is far from over, and we will not give up for truth. Thank you, Truth Seeker. I appreciate that. Truth Seeker, of course, is the person who not once but twice gave up her seat for me so that I could go in, see the trial, and report back to you on it. It was an amazing gift. She had the seat. She was earlier in line, and she gave up her seat for me. It was just such an incredible gift. I remain absolutely amazed and grateful for what she did. And by the way, we have a very special outro tonight. Marlon, our very own Marlon, has done it's like a little movie. It's a minute and a half, and it starts out with our regular outro, but then the last minute is devoted to the line sitters as a special thank you to the line sitters, saying how much what they did was appreciated. And of course, Truth Seeker also actually gave me her seat, but the line sitters stayed up all night so that I could go home, do my live stream with you, and then get a little bit of sleep and go back the next day. And if they hadn't done that, I think I would have had to give up. It literally was physically impossible. So but I'm beyond grateful. And Marlon did this you won't believe this outro. You really will not believe this outro. So you have to stick around. It's about a minute and a half. So you'll recognize the first 30 seconds. And after that, it's all new. It's about a minute and a half. So you'll really like that. Sarah B, super sticker. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Now, let's do a few questions and let's see if you would, please be sure to put the question marks at the beginning because otherwise it's real tough to spot them in the chat. Mama T is asking, will you cover the third-party culprit in geofencing or have you already? So there's not, I thought I would be able to cover that in a great deal of detail because I thought that their proffer would be very specific. Like here is the witness. Here's what the witness would say. Here's all the information that we would have presented. But it wasn't like that. They just summarized some of the questions they would have asked. They were allowed to import the hearing that happened this summer. They were allowed to just use that as their evidence, as part of their proffer, but I unfortunately I didn't see that. So I don't have access to exactly what was said there. Therefore, so I covered it some. I did I think maybe a series of 3 videos pulling together all of the evidence and information that I could find that related to 3 of the potential third-party culprits, but there were more. So I have a good deal of that. You can look back at the videos and take a look at that. And then there were more that weren't even included. They had a long list of potential ones. All right, I'm looking for the question marks at the beginning. Betsy wants to be my sidekick. I did learn. I think I may do a little thing, all the things I learned at Delphi, because there were a lot of things I learned. And one is that it's really helpful to have a sidekick. not to be by yourself. So that is something that I learned. All right, let's see. I'm looking for here we go. Jolene. Hey, Jolene. What can they do on appeal about the 7 untested hairs? Basically nothing. Now, they can argue that the hairs should have been tested, but I cannot picture the appellate court saying, yes, the failure to test and the conclusion made by law enforcement that it wasn't worthwhile is enough to reverse it. Add that to the long list of things that they have to appeal, but I would say that is not one very likely, because the appellate court isn't going to want to second guess the choice made by law enforcement. Their argument was, while they could have tested those hairs using FBI new protocols that allow them to test hair that doesn't have a root. Up until now, it had to have a root, but the FBI testing may be able to go further. They said they didn't want to destroy evidence, then there's some kind of breakthrough later that makes this easy to test. And the defense response was, he's on trial for murder now. It was a really good point. Really good point. It absolutely should have been tested. So yeah, they may add that to the list. I just think that's a little bit harder because the appellate court is not going to want to get into that decision. Just my theory. Because and think through, if they were to do that, if they were to second guess that, then think of all of the pieces of evidence that might be presented to them that maybe they should have done this and that. Shouldn't law enforcement have done this? It becomes difficult. So they're going to have a very, very high standard when it comes to a choice like that. If they retry, would I travel or cover it? It was very, very hard. I would think about it. I would think about it. It certainly, if there was let's say a different judge or handled it and it was going to be easier access. It was so difficult. I think I probably would go back if they retried it. I'd be so curious to know what happened. I would really want to hear the third party culprit evidence, because I think that's where the reversal would happen. Could Libby's phone just have been on Do Not Disturb? Anna asked. Well, I don't know how to answer that. It's very possible that there was some explanation for that, but we sure didn't get it at trial. And it seems to me if there was an easy answer, that prosecution would have brought it. And it just wasn't. There really was no real explanation for these huge problems with Libby's phone. It just remained one of the mysteries, and it was never really solved. Obviously, the jury decided, well, close enough. We can't answer every question, and they moved forward with that. Rita, are you taking a vacay? Yes, that is not fully decided yet. Yes, I said I was going to take 2 weeks off. That was untrue. That was clearly untrue, but I am going to be going slower. We'll put it that way. All right. So Kelly Rose, why no defensive wounds on either girl? Again, one of the enduring mysteries. How is that even possible? And why was it? I mean, especially for Abby, because the implication was she just lay there and her throat was cut, and that it just doesn't seem likely. And yet that is what it showed. There were no defensive wounds. There were no bruises. There was nothing suggesting she had been tied up or anything. And strange. The only thing were 2 lines across her face. What could they have been? A scarf tied around her, something to keep her from yelling? Who knows? That was very faint lines on the face. That was it, running from one side to the other. 2. All right. Is there, Pamela is asking me, is there a way for them to get a different judge if they can get a new trial? And normally, after the appeal, that it's going to come back to the same judge. Maybe there's something different happens, but typically it goes back to the exact same judge. And could the judge decide to retire? Could the judge decide, I don't want to take it anymore, appoint somebody else? Could they just say, we're going to appoint someone else? Those things could happen. They would be quite unusual. Normal step, you go back to the same judge. And the judge didn't really look at retirement age to me, but I don't know. All right. So J. Ray, can we please go over the warrant and the Franks motion, please? Well, that would be interesting. I did the Franks motion way back when, but that was so long ago, and I knew so much less by then. back then. It would be interesting actually to go over the Frank's motion. So let me know. I know we'll just see. We'll just see. Thank you for your input, and I'll give that some thought, J. Ray. Angel wants to know, can I jump back in to cover the Karen Reed case? I probably will cover the Karen Reed case when it heads back into trial. I found that one really interesting as well. Kelly wants to know, why does everyone believe that the person on the bridge kidnapped the girls? I just think that you can't truly hear anything. I certainly couldn't. The law enforcement said they could hear, the witness said, well, here's a transcript, basically. Here's what I heard them say. But I couldn't tell that from the little bit of time that I think we were shown it a total of 4 times if you count closing argument. So why does everyone believe the person on the bridge kidnapped the girls? I think just because it did seem to me very possible that someone else was there too, that Libby was talking to. If I could watch that over and over, I could pull out so much more information. But I think because the guy is so close to them by the end of it, he's right up there, and they're talking about going down the hill, and it just seems like he would either have notified law enforcement that he had just witnessed a kidnapping 2 feet away from him, or he's the guy. So I think that was how they must have rationalized it. Louisiana girl, what evidence did you hear that would have convinced you of guilt? So I'm going to hold off on that a little bit. Betsy, so she's very serious. Betsy is retired. Well, I think I might need you, Betsy. Alk, how long can someone stay out in lower 40s after wading through cold water up to 3 feet deep, fully clothed? So I think here's what law enforcement would say. They can stay out forever because they're not alive. And so they waded through the water. It's cold, like you say. It had to have been. It was February, even if it was unseasonably warm. And they were up to 3 feet deep because that's how high it came up on Libby with her jeans wet and her sweatshirt and her shirt. So maybe they didn't both get at that wet, but at least Abby would have. Did I say Libby? Abby. Abby was the one wearing Libby's jeans and her shirt. So they would say that how long can they stay out? Well, it didn't matter because it was within minutes that they were both killed. That's what they would argue. It's a very, very quick period of time. Luna is also interested in the Frank's motion. Yeah, that it is very interesting. Let me flip back over here and see where was I with Sarah B. Okay. All right. Jay Hancock, do you know if all of the unknown male DNA that was found can still be analyzed? Okay, this is what, when they kept saying this was unknown male DNA, my understanding was it wasn't sufficient that they could track it. It wasn't a full, complete profile where they could maybe trace that using the Codex database or some other method. They couldn't use genetic genealogy. They didn't have that much. They had enough to know it was male, and that was about all they had. They didn't have a sufficient amount to give them an actual DNA profile to match. And so I don't think that any of that had a sufficient amount to take it further. They did find male DNA, but they just didn't give us enough information from that to keep going. So I think that is the answer. Lee W. Marine, thank you. I appreciate that. That reminds me, Lawyer Lee W. is what my Twitter account is, X. So please be sure to follow me over there. I'm trying to do more posts as we go for cases. So I tried to post all the way through this case, and we'll continue to do that. So Lee W. reminded me of that. Thank you, Lee W. Marine. I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate that. And JD is saying thank you to the angels that helped me along the way. And that's the truth. And there were so many. I am so grateful to them. And to Jen, who organized all the line sitters. I mean, can you even imagine that people would stay up all night for you so that I could watch the trial? And they did that for us so that I could come and tell you about the trial. They thought it was that important that there be a report of what was happening inside the courtroom. I'm beyond honored that they would do that, and so grateful. So thank you very, very much to them. And C.A. Beverford, thank you. Good to hear from you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to answer, I think, maybe one more question. And Then maybe two, and then we're going to hear our brand new, never before heard line sitter outro. It is like a little movie. You're going to love this. It's a minute and a half, so the first 30 seconds you'll recognize, and then you'll start to see the all new part. So don't forget that. Michelle is asking me whether Kathy Allen stated in the interrogation, "I thought you said you weren't on the bridge that day." I have either you asked me that before or someone else did. I don't remember that. I don't remember hearing that, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. So I can't fully answer that question, but either you've mentioned it twice or someone else mentioned it as well. Beth Hammer, is there speculation as to why Abby's hands were clean? No, and it doesn't make any sense at all. The blood ran from her neck toward her nose, so that means she had to have been tilted with her head down. How? Did Richard Allen hold her that way? Is that what the prosecution argument is? And how did he do that if Libby was still alive? I thought there frankly could have been more discussion of that by the defense too, because a lot of that didn't fully make sense. I couldn't figure out how it worked. How did the blood run that way? How could one person have done this? It seemed like a very complex scene. I'll put it that way. And Abby was clean from here down. How did that happen? I mean, if she were standing up, then obviously the blood would go down, and it didn't run that way. It ran upward. So she had to have been somewhat upside down, somewhat tilted. Very confusing. Noodles wants to know, is it true that the hair in Abby's hand was tested and came back as Kelsey's? It is, in fact, true. That is correct. Lorraine asking me, was toxicology performed at the autopsy? Not really. No. There was some testing, but they didn't, for example, test stomach contents or anything along those lines, at least not that we were given information about. Kelly Jane, the prosecution is sure. Oh no, Kelly Jane doesn't know about me with the abbreviations. Prosecution is sure that Richard Allen was bridge guy. Hey, I did it pretty well. Why didn't they ask witnesses this? Richard Allen was going to essay the girls and leave them alive if he hadn't seen the van. Doesn't make sense. So that is true that they did not ask the witnesses, you were there at the scene and you saw that man. Do you see that man sitting here in the courtroom today? That's a pretty common question that prosecutors will ask so that there's an identification of the witness, but they did not ask the witnesses that. And part of it might be because they were talking about a young guy with long curly hair, which didn't really look like Richard Allen with very little hair and small. They were talking about tall and he was short. None of it seemed to really fit. So they didn't ask him to identify anybody, and they did not. So now, as at long last, Marlon's movie, and I think you will absolutely love this. So special shout out, huge shout out to the line sitters. They made all the difference. It could not have been done without them. And to Marlon, thank you.